Steve, thanks very much for that kind introduction. Well, it's a great privilege for me to be with you today. First of all, I love Iowa. If I'd been smart, I'd have been here in 2003, but I wasn't smart. And I've met some of the best people in the world in Iowa, and this industry is one of the most wonderful industries in the world. It's been one of the great privileges of my time in getting out of uniform to get to know people in Iowa, people in the ethanol business, in the farm community up here. It's just a great part of America. So thanks very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. Now, I'd like to ask a little public opinion poll here. How many of you all have seen the movie American Sniper? Could I see your hands? Pretty good, pretty good. I saw the movie. I know the guy. He was on my TV show in 2012 as one of the Special Forces guys. And I think that what I got out of that movie is what a lot of us feel about America. We love this country. We want to protect it. We want the best thing for it. And that's why I'm here with you this morning, because this country needs our help and our support. It needs your voice and your leadership. Now just look around the world at where we are today. In China, what we've got is a very rapidly growing Chinese economy with an even more rapidly growing Chinese military. None of us know where that's going to take them, but they do claim the South China Sea. They'd like us out of Korea. They are building 4 new aircraft carriers, and as the Chinese told me when I was there a year or so ago, they said, we actually do know how to take off and land on aircraft carriers. Yeah, they're looking at us. They admire us, but they're China. They have 4 times the population. They have 10 times the history. And as far as they're concerned, they should be the center of the world. They can't understand why these big-nosed barbarians over here are running everything. And so the future with China is uncertain. In the Middle East, we've got beheadings, we've got conflict, we've got the king of Saudi Arabia who died, we've got an Iranian-backed Shia insurgency in Yemen that's caused us to close the embassy there. We've reduced cooperation with the government in our strikes against terrorism. We've got 1,000 advisors on the ground in Iraq. We're running airstrikes every day against ISIL, both in Iraq and in Syria. We've got the government of Turkey, which is a major entryway for ISIS. They say they're not connected to them and they don't like them, but on the other hand, they don't like Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, and they think that ISIS will help them control Bashar al-Assad. And then you've got Israel surrounded with our ally Jordan. We've got a bunch of troops in Jordan stabilizing Jordan. Meanwhile, Israel runs a strike against some Hezbollah leaders. It turns out that there's an Iranian general there, and they kill the Iranian general in the airstrike. It's a mistake. Yeah, but what's an Iranian general doing with Hezbollah about 20 miles north of the Israeli border? The Iranians said he was in an important meeting. You can imagine what that was about. So there's plenty of conflict in the Middle East, but the real conflict, and what you're not seeing in most of the newspapers, is what's going on in Ukraine. Since March of last year, Vladimir Putin has determined that he's going to disassemble Ukraine. He took Crimea. He took it because the Ukrainians were told not to fight. It was their peninsula. They pulled out. They were pretty mad about that. 500,000 Ukrainians showed up on a weekend and said, give us weapons, we want to fight for our country. And Russia then launched its special forces into eastern Ukraine. They took government buildings in Donbass, the Don Basin there, that's the eastern part of Ukraine where the heavy industry is. They then sent Russian intelligence agents in to organize guerrilla warfare against the government. When the government responded, the Russian military intervened. Over the weekend, the Russian military, and we know this for fact, The Russian military is in there with maybe 8,000 troops, 500 tanks, in addition to the separatist tanks that also come from Russia. But the separatists they're Russian mercenaries. They're thugs. Some people call them European soccer trash. They're guys who don't have jobs. They get paid $100, $200 a month. They come into Ukraine to fight. But then they've got the Russian regular armed forces in there. They fired 3 volleys of big rockets into the city of Mariupol, killed about 30, 40 people, wounded about 100. So conflict is spreading in eastern Ukraine. And the world the geostrategic risk is rising. In the middle of this, the United States has record economic growth. The European Union is threatening to break apart. The price of oil has fallen to a 6-year low. Gasoline's under $2, and you have to ask what's going on. Now, we're all here because we believe in the renewable fuel standard. We believe in our ethanol business. So what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is give you some perspective on how this fits together and ask for your support in this critically important state of Iowa as we move ahead. What's happened to the United States, in a nutshell, is this. We came out of World War II as the greatest power in the world, and we established the structure of the world the way it is today. The currency exchange, the United Nations, the alliances. We held back communism after the communists took communist China. We built NATO. We fought a war in Korea. We fought in Vietnam. We contained the advance of communism. We had a strategy, and if you could ask any American on the street and any of our veterans here, and they'll tell you what American strategy was during the Cold War. The idea was stop the Soviet Union, contain communism, don't let them launch a nuclear strike on the United States. And Eisenhower basically created the strategy. He said that Americans, Democrats and Republicans, they don't always agree, but they have to come together because outside the United States is a threat that we can only survive if we work together. That was Ike's strategy. He put it out in his 1953 inaugural, and every president after him used it one way or another. Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Carter, everybody up until George H.W. Bush. When the Soviet Union fell apart, then there was no strategy because there was no opponent. We won the Cold War. We lost a lot of people in the process, but we never actually fought against the Soviet Union, and communism was dead. And in America, we kind of went hog wild. It was the greatest decade anybody could remember. We had the internet come online. We had cell phones. We opened up the North American Free Trade Agreement. Despite what happened in Tiananmen Square, we started a big-time trade with communist China. We did the World Trade Organization. We created 22 million jobs. The economy boomed, and every element of the American economic scale, from the wealthiest to the poorest, got better, at least statistically speaking. Everybody did better, and we even balanced the budget the last couple of years there in 98, 99, 2000. It was an amazing period of American economic growth. But the thing is, if you asked Americans during that period, what's the strategy, they couldn't tell you. There was no strategy in the world. It was like, hey, Cold War's over, we won, we're the big dog, and hey, let's go trade and have a great time. We did. And then 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, we were shocked. General Colin Powell said, it's an act of war. And the country came together. You remember that iconic picture of President Bush up at the World Trade Center site? He's got his hard hat on, he's got the megaphone, he's got his arm around the fire chief, and Congress stood on the steps and sang, Democrats and Republicans together, God bless America. I mean, it was an amazing time in this country. And we didn't know where the next strike was going to happen. It could have been anthrax. It could have been another series of terrorist strikes against America. We went on high alert. We created the Department of Homeland Security. And within a few days, really 3 weeks, we were striking back at the source of our problem in Afghanistan. We'd asked the Afghan government, deliver us Osama bin Laden. It was no secret who did it. Give us Osama bin Laden. They said no. So we started bombing. We sent in a few special forces guys, about 500. We had precision ordnance. Those 500 guys, some of them riding horses, allied with the opposition to the Taliban government in Afghanistan. In 2.5 months, the government collapsed. And hey, our guys were in charge in Afghanistan. It only took 2.5 months, suffered 3 or 4 American casualties during that process, proved the superiority of American technology, but we allowed Osama bin Laden to escape over the mountains into Pakistan. We allowed it. We didn't actually send the military after Osama bin Laden, and when we could have, we didn't. Instead, from the very moments in the Pentagon during the attack of 9/11, our leaders were thinking about invading Iraq. I was on CNN that day. I remember getting a call from a guy in Canada who was with an Israeli think tank in Canada, and he said, "You have to say that Saddam Hussein did 9/11." I said, "Why do I have to say that?" He said, "Because it was too big to have been done without a state sponsor. It could have only been done by Saddam Hussein." And I said, "Show me the evidence." And in a way that sort of presaged a lot of what we heard for the next 3 years. Who was really behind 9/11? In March of 2003, more than half the American people still believed that Saddam Hussein was connected to 9/11. 80% of the media, it's estimated, supported the invasion of Iraq. I was one of those guys who kept asking questions. I couldn't see it. I had seen the intelligence before I retired in 2000. I knew Saddam Hussein the last people he ever wanted inside Iraq were people like Osama bin Laden. He was diametrically opposed to that kind of terrorism. He didn't have anything to do with 9/11, although he was probably happy to have somebody attack the United States. He was certainly no friend of America. But we went to war because the people in the U.S. government at the top, in the White House, the Pentagon, determined they wanted to go to war in Iraq. It's been 12 years in March. We still don't really know why we went to war. Was it weapons of mass destruction? Was it to teach Saddam Hussein a lesson? Was it because he might have a nuclear weapon in 10 years? Was it because we thought it would be a salutary lesson to terrorists that if we were willing to invade one country, we could invade another? Some people said it was because Afghanistan was too far away. It's a lot easier to go after Iraq. Whatever reason it was. And there have been a lot of them advanced, and nobody knows conclusively why we went after Saddam Hussein. But the United States Armed Forces, we'd spent a decade since the Gulf War of 1991 practicing how to take down the Iraqi government. So, needless to say, it went pretty well. It was a 3-week campaign. Boom! We went right up the center of the country. 3rd Infantry Division, tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, brave soldiers, great commanders, right into the center of Baghdad, smashed the defenses wide open, and it was like a miracle. We had the country. We got rid of the army, got rid of the Ba'athist Party, had no leadership there, and before you know it, we had both a civil war and a terrorist movement fighting against us. So, looking back on it now from the perspective of 2015, you can see it was a lost decade. The consequence of Iraq was 5,000 U.S. dead, $1.5 trillion spent. We're still in Afghanistan. We're back dealing with the consequences of throwing out Saddam Hussein in Iraq. We're not going to solve this anytime soon. But the American people tend to believe now, if you talk about national security and you talk about threats, everybody focuses on the Middle East. If you step back and look at this, and you all are going to be the most important ambassadors of the renewable fuels business, because you're going to be talking to all the candidates for high office who come through Iowa. Make them step back and put it in perspective. Here's the real situation facing this country. We have long-term challenges that will survive and be here long after President Obama's gone, or the next president, or the president after that. They're not going to go away. They're analogous in duration to something like the Cold War that lasted through 7 presidents. These challenges are the challenge of international terrorism, the challenge of cyber security, the challenge of using the financial system to help us grow economically without becoming captive to a financial system which is volatile and unstable and could collapse. The challenge of China growing ever stronger, and whether we can integrate China successfully into the international community. And finally, the challenge of a changing climate. Those 5 challenges all have certain things in common. They're all long-term. You can't declare war against one of them and think you're going to solve it in the next 2 years and get a medal and be a hero and be reelected. It's not going to happen. They all require the private sector to work with the public sector and the public sector to work with the private sector. If you're going to guard against terrorism, it takes money from business. You've got to hire security guards. You've got to staff up for it. Same thing with cybersecurity. But you can't just turn it over to the private sector. You've got to have government leadership. Got to work the government. The financial system has to be worked between the public sector, the Fed, the Treasury, and the banks in the private sector, and the beyond the banks into the insurance companies and the other in the whole financial system. China has to be worked with private industry as well as the government. You can't just build a couple of aircraft carriers and say, okay, we got China handled in the Western Pacific. Not going to happen. And climate change. We're over 400 parts per million on a year-round basis of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're not scientists, just like Bill Belichick is not an expert on inflating footballs. But it's pretty obvious that something's changing with the climate. And you can set all the arguments aside. The point is that carbon dioxide holds heat in the atmosphere, and that heat goes either into the oceans, the ground, or the air. It adds energy. And that has all kinds of consequences that they're modeling out. It's there. It's a fact. So these 5 long-term challenges require public-private partnerships. They require working with people in other countries. You can't build a fence around America. They require money and resources. And they require leadership in this country. And right now, this country is badly split politically. I don't have to tell you that because you're at ground zero of it in Iowa when people talk about the 2016 presidential campaign. There are going to be people coming out here talking about everything in the world, from withdrawing from the world to doing the opposite. So the question is then, how does America come together? I think the way we come together is we rebuild the American economy. And if you look at how to rebuild the American economy, and this is where you come in now, stay with me on this. If you look at how you rebuild the American economy, what's the easiest way to rebuild it? Is it to fix public education? Well, it's really important. We've been talking about it since 1983. Maybe not in Iowa, but in lots of other places around America, including my home state of Arkansas, public schools are not doing too well. We're not producing as many scientists and engineers as we should be. We're bringing them in from abroad. You can go through statistic after statistic after statistic to show that American education needs to be buttressed, reinforced, reinvigorated. But that's not going to change the country very quickly. Is it to rebuild American manufacturing? Yeah, and you might get a few 100,000 jobs a year if you really work this, but it's like my friend who's the top diplomat in India told me a couple of years ago. He says, your wages will go down to be the same as the wages in India. Then you can rebuild your manufacturing. Well, we're not waiting for that. I mean, maybe there's some truth in that. He was kind of laughing about it. I guess he'd like to see our wages the same as the wages in India, but I wouldn't. So we're not going to save the country by suddenly shrinking everybody's wages and having a bunch of foreign entrepreneurs come over here to take advantage of cheap American labor. We can get some manufacturing back, yes we can, but it's not the quick fix. The quickest fix on this economy, believe it or not, is energy. We've spent 45 years, well 44 years, importing oil into this economy, and we pay for it. Now, if you talk to some of my macroeconomic friends, they'll say, that's no problem. You pay and you get oil. It's a fair exchange of value. No, it isn't. Not when you can produce that fuel at home. We've sent trillions of dollars abroad. In 2008 alone, we spent $500 billion importing foreign oil into the United States. 2011, it was like $300 billion. Now we're producing a little bit more oil. The price of oil is down. This year it's going to be about $100 billion. I guess $100 billion is such a small amount of money, we may not even have to worry about it, right? But I'm from Arkansas, and we make $40,000 a year per family. That $100 billion goes a long way in a place like Arkansas. If we could keep that money in the American economy, we would accelerate economic growth. We have to replace imported fuels with domestic fuels. Now, some people would tell you in the oil industry that don't worry about it, we got it covered. Don't you believe it? I'm in the oil business. I know how it works. There's lots of oil and gas out there, but quick as you take it out of the ground, it's gone. It doesn't get replaced. It's gone. There's new technology. There's lots of money. I think we spent $150 billion last year in Bakken on oil drilling. So there's lots of money going into this. Wall Street loves these shale plays because when oil was $100 a barrel, you could put $10 million into a company and get $10 million out from a couple of fracked wells the next year. It's 100% return. You just got to pick the right production team or drilling team or exploration company. And it's a nice play for Wall Street. But shale production declines at between 70% and 90% per year. So first year you get a well, it's 500 barrels a day. At the end of the year, it's 100 barrels a day. It may produce 100 barrels for a long time, and you and I could probably live pretty well off 100 barrels a day. But it's not what people think of when they think of oil and gas. So we're not going to become energy independent on oil alone. I'm all in favor of wind and solar, but that's not what we're spending our money on. We're producing our own electricity, except for a little bit coming in from Canada on the East Coast. I'm talking about not importing liquid fuel. And that's where we fit in. We, the ethanol business. And that's our key. We're the key to America's economic growth. Just look at what's happened to Iowa. It starts here in Iowa because you're the center of the renewable fuel standard. It goes out all over the country. People invest in you. You're buying goods and services produced everywhere. You're the center of this, the centerpiece. We're an economic engine. We're started up. We know the technology. We know what we're producing. We know how to be more efficient year after year. All we need is to be turned loose in a free marketplace. I don't want to start calling out these presidential candidates by name, because that's for you all in Iowa to do. But I will tell you, I was reading the statement of one of them last night who said he wasn't in favor of ethanol because he liked a free market and he didn't like government regulation in that market. Then you tell me why government has to tell us that gasoline, that liquid fuel has to be 90% gasoline. Sounds like government regulation to me. So we're producing right now just under 1 million barrels a day of ethanol. We're exporting it. And Tom Vilsack, our Secretary of Agriculture, has promised, and he's working hard on it to help us expand those exports all around the world, because if you produce ethanol, you know it's a cleaner, greener fuel, and it's getting cleaner and greener all the time. But where we want to sell it is here in the United States, and we're blocked, the so-called blend wall, by big oil. I've been with Growth Energy since 2009. We formed Growth Energy to crack that blend wall. We applied for permission to bring E15 to the marketplace, and we're still working to get E15 to the marketplace. We just had our first chain in Florida announce yesterday that they're bringing E15 to the marketplace. We're working initiatives all over the country. But this is like running in wet sand on the beach. Boy, you talk about a resistant medium. It's like my friends in the oil business say, Wes, they say, you ethanol people, you're killing us at the pump, because when we want to sell our gasoline at the rack, at the rack where we're selling it wholesale, when we could get the extra couple of pennies a gallon, you're there with a cheaper product month after month. You're taking away our profit margins. You're taking away our market. Yeah, that's right, because the gasoline industry, the oil refining business, is still importing net 5 to 6 million barrels of oil per day. Even at $50 oil, that's a lot of money going out of this country. And that's money that is extracted from us at the pump every day. So the big picture is this. In order to handle the big 5 challenges that we're facing, we've got to start growing this economy. We can't have an economy in which people's wages don't go up, in which there's no real investment, in which the big investment banks, they do things like invest in payday lending instead of building real things, because they don't understand the value of real development in this country. We've got friends who come into this country from overseas. They think our airports in New York City look like a third world country. They look at crumbling infrastructure in America. They look at no high-speed rail. And they say, what's happening in America? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what's happening is that we're not growing because we've had 44 years of what they call fiscal drag caused by importing oil. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year in and year out, have gone to foreign governments for something we could be producing here ourselves. We're not going to be energy independent relying on oil alone. We've got to have biofuels. We've got to break that blend wall. We can be producing 3 million barrels a day of biofuels. We could double and even increase by another third what we're producing in biofuels. Between corn-based ethanol and cellulosic ethanol and biodiesel, we could do this. We can make America energy independent and restart this economy on the road to real economic growth, not statistical growth. I'm talking about the kind of prosperity you've seen in Iowa. We can bring it all the way across America, and it starts right here. Now, the world's a very uncertain place. you're going to ask me what's happened to the price of oil and when's it going to go up and all that stuff. So let me explain a little bit about this. So we got a little out of balance in supply and demand in the world energy markets in June, July. And there's not a lot of elasticity in the supply and demand side. If you produce too much oil, there's only so much storage for it. And people are buying up tankers and renting tankers to store that extra capacity right now. So the price point is pretty narrowly fixed. It's pretty sharp. When it started to tip in the summer, the tip was fed by financial speculation because there's a lot of finance in the oil futures market. It's a big store of value, and you can get tremendous leverage on your investment. And if you're in the trading business, I mean, why miss it? So if you think the market's going to go down a little bit, get ahead of it. Don't be long short it. And so as this momentum picked up and people started to digest the growth in American energy production, both oil and biofuels, people abroad started to say, you know, America, they might become energy independent. And this could be real bad for us. I was in Kazakhstan in October of 2013, and one of the top people in the government said to me, he said, you Americans are going to become energy independent. He said, and that means you won't need us. We'll have to look elsewhere for allies. One of my friends was in Saudi Arabia in October, and one of the top people in the Saudi government asked him, he said, how low does the price of oil have to go to break the shale industry? Will $80 do it? And I think there was some thinking around the world that they could destroy the American shale business at $80. I don't know if that was the official position, but people were asking these questions. And turns out you can't. But once this downward momentum picked up, and after especially the OPEC meeting in November, where Saudi Arabia said, look, we've seen this movie before. We're not going to cut production to try to hold up price. We're going to try to hold on to our market share. We're going to cut price, and then, you know, for whatever reason. Some people say it was a deliberate ploy by the Saudis to break the U.S. shale industry. Some people say it was a move by Saudi Arabia against Iran. Some people say the United States asked the Saudis to do it to punish President Putin. But for whatever reason, the price of oil has gone down. And you're going to ask me, where's that price of oil going? So the only sure thing anybody can tell you about the price of oil is that almost every prediction is wrong. Now, this is a fact. You can't tell when this market's going to turn around. One of the big investment banks in New York today announced they're creating a fund to buy distressed debt and invest in distressed oil companies. I guess that means they think it's going to go on for a long time. I don't know. I'm in the business on the oil side. I don't think it's going to go on for a long time, and here's why. Because, as I explained with shale, what happens is the production of a well declines very rapidly in the first year. So think of it this way. If the United States added 1 million barrels of new production in the last 12 months, if they did nothing else in the well site, at the end of those 12 months, we wouldn't be producing an extra 1 million barrels a day. We'd be producing an extra 250 or 300,000 barrels a day. In other words, the production would go down that rapidly. It's not like sticking a straw in the ground and at spindle top, you know, the oil comes up and it just keeps coming. That's not the way this works. So if that's the case, 12 months from now, U.S. production should be certainly no more than it is today. Some investment still going on. There's still some wells being fracked and so forth out there. But it should be less, a lot less. And on the demand side, what you have is a growing world economy. You know, China is still growing 7.5% per year. That may not make Wall Street happy, but it's still growing economy, and it's still the largest importer of oil. So world demand goes up between 800,000 barrels a day and 1.5 million barrels a day per year. So if you look at U.S. production coming down and world demand going up, then what's to keep the price from turning around pretty sharply pretty soon? That's the question. Maybe Russia can pump more oil. Putin would like to do that because he needs the money, but the Russian oil industry is actually suffering some setbacks of technology and capital infusion. So it doesn't seem likely. Maybe OPEC can squeeze a few more barrels out. Maybe the Saudis can produce more. Maybe the Nigerians. They all want the money, and maybe that'll offset it. But at some point, the declining investment in production in the United States, the rapid drop-off of these fracked wells, and the growing demand for oil throughout the developing world is going to hit the balance point, and the price of oil is going to accelerate. So when is that point? The earliest point, people say, is March. Some people say the summer. Some people say October, December of 2015. And some people say never. Prince Alawid, Saudi Arabia, says the price of oil will go down to $20. Possible, but I think it's unlikely. We can't predict the price of oil exactly because it's caught up with too many exogenous events. But we can tell the direction. And the direction is oil is a declining resource and world demand is growing. So I think the one thing you can be sure of is that world demand for oil will increase, barring some nuclear war, some complete catastrophe of an asteroid striking America, or maybe the collapse of China's government. And that means the price is going back up. It's just a question of how soon. So what that means for us is America needs us and the world needs us in the renewable fuels business. We're not going to do this with oil alone. We need a less expensive, greener, higher octane fuel for America. We need it. We have it here. In this room, you are the key to America's future. Now, when these presidential candidates come out, you got some big organizations helping you. You got America's Renewable Future. Governor Branstad announced that. That's Growth Energy, our organization. It's Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. It's Iowa Corn, and we're looking for other people to come with us. So we're going to have a program out there. Eric Branstad, Derek Eden, some other great people like Patty Judge, my old friend. They're all going to be out there working on our behalf. But it's up to you. You're the best spokesman for this business, and in this business, you're the best spokesman for America's future. We're the United States of America. We built the structure of the global economy. We're the leaders of the world. It's our values, our belief in democracy and freedom and human rights that's animated so much of modern history. We want this to continue. It won't without a strong U.S. economy, and the key to a strong U.S. economy is right here, right in Iowa, right in the renewable fuel space, in saving that money from going abroad and building jobs and prosperity at home. That's us. So I know we're not American snipers, and most of us didn't go to Iraq, and each of you will have your own view on that movie. But I think each one of you feels like I do about this country. We're the greatest country in the world. We're doing something in America that nobody in human history has ever been able to do. It's build a democracy, a stable democracy, where there's rule of law, not arbitrary justice, where people's opinions count and their rights are respected. And that democracy rests squarely on the foundation of our economy. And that economy rests on innovation and agriculture and renewable fuels. That's you. So you're at the center of this, and we need you. Big 2 years coming up. Let's get out there and whatever we do, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, Independents, on the left, on the right, it doesn't matter. We got to stand up for what we know is right for America. Make us energy independent. Give us folks in the biofuels movement a chance to participate in this American marketplace. That's all we're asking. We'll make America safe and we'll make America strong. Thank you.